right, where did we leave off last week? When we began our unit on Jewish history? Well, last time, I should say. By the way, talk about next week. We will not be meeting as a class in this room. We will be having a special breakfast. Another one of those breakfasts, and I'll be doing a session on Jewish prayer. Okay, so that'll be for breakfast next week.
Same time?
Same time.
Are we going to meet the weekend after that, the 18th?
Yes,
Okay.
God willing. I don't think we're going to meet the 25th and the 1st. Somehow I think people have other plans. So where did we leave off last week?
Oddly enough, I have my notes with me for once, and it was the split of the northern and southern
Right.
kingdoms.
Okay.
And
Hopefully,
Syria.
hopefully we'll get all the way to the Hanukkah story today, because that'll be very appropriate. Okay. There are certain events that are very, very telling in Jewish history, and are really milestones that change Jewish life. Like the first one was probably the movement of Abraham from his homeland to the land of Canaan, where he began his new mission as the father of the Jewish people. The second event that changed the course of Jewish history is the going of Father Jacob and his family down to Egypt. Because it's in Egypt that we became a people. We were just a big family when we came down. We emerged a people. How many people again? Who remembers? Did we exit Egypt with?
Is it Egypt?
600,000, or was it? No, it was more.
There were 600 and about 27,000, something like that, men of fighting age. Which must leave you with a population of 2 to 3 million, probably. Right. Of course, the next watershed event probably would be the coming to Sinai at the exodus of Egypt. I would include the exodus and Sinai really just one event, one to the other, because that's what they did. They went right there, got out of Egypt and went right to Sinai. Receiving of the Torah, that really marks a change in Jewish life, in the Jewish world. And the entrance of the Jewish people into the land 40 years later. Beginning of kingship with King Saul, which probably happened somewhere around, Abraham was about 1800 BCE. The exodus from Egypt was about 1250, 1300 BCE, something like that. King Saul was probably about 1050, something like that. King David is about 1000 BCE, and you have King Solomon. The watershed event, with David and Solomon, was David solidified the empire. That's why the kingship is important. By conquering or making peace with all the nations around him. Solomon built the temple, and on Solomon's death, the kingdom split, and that's very important. The kingdom split because the northern kingdom didn't want to continue to pay the taxes that were really not necessary, because the temple was already built that Solomon had levied on them, and Solomon's son refused to take away. And so the northern kingdom split away. But the northern kingdom included 10 tribes. And they eventually were destroyed. They were destroyed by the Assyrians. And this destruction is important also in terms of Christianity, because they base they're one of the most important verses on this event. Although they take it completely out of context, where King Ahaz, who was the king of Judea, was besieged by the northern kingdom and its ally Syria, who were in a treaty, a fellowship. I don't think that's in there yet. It doesn't start till the Maccabees, I believe, post-biblical. and asked that they go along in breaking away from the bonds of Assyria, which was really in Iraq, which really had all the countries around the Middle East pay tribute to it. And so Syria was trying to vie for power and asked the Northern Kingdom to go along with it. Northern Kingdom didn't want to pay taxes, so went along with it. And then they tried to force the Southern Kingdom to go along. King Ahaz asked his foreign policy advisor, Isaiah, nice to have a prophet as a foreign policy advisor, isn't it? And he asked him, what should he do? And he said, the Lord shall give you a sign, and the young woman, meaning his wife, will bear a son. He had lost a child. And she shall conceive and name his, and you shall name him Emmanuel. And she did conceive and have a son, and he didn't go along with it. And P.S. the northern kingdom was destroyed. Syria did not come to its aid. So much for making treaties with Syria. And that's was spread all along the Assyrian Empire, and that's referred to as the lost 10 tribes of Israel. And that's why you hear about lost 10 tribes cropping up in different places. Like Ethiopia had the tribe of Dan, and that's where many people feel the Ethiopian Jews came from. In India, you have these, or in China, you had these communities that were isolated, who practiced a biblical form of Judaism. That was, that had strained its roots from that particular time period, but was completely different than the rabbinic Judaism that developed later on for us. And it's fascinating to see it. The problem with China was that it was so isolated and so hard to get to, and there were remnants of it when the communists came aboard, but they just wiped them all out. It's interesting among the communists in China that the Chinese referred, not just the communists, the Chinese themselves referred to the Jews as the people of the book, and who did they put in with them, the people of the book? The Muslims. So Jews and the Muslims are like, the same sort of thing. We were lumped together there. And among the Muslim communities, it was the Jews and the Christians. They were put together.
Excuse me, I'm going to
go. Okay. So this is where we left the stage last week in Jewish history. The Southern Kingdom continues to develop on its own. It's composed really of the tribe of Judah. Benjamin was really absorbed into that tribe. And what do we have today? How many tribes do we have today among Jews? It's very interesting. I wear my yarmulke all the time now. And I go to all around the country. I travel around Georgia. People who've never seen Jews before, and they say, "What's that on your head?" It's a kippah. Jews wear this. And if I'm wearing one with a design, they'll ask me, does that design signify which tribe you're from? I mean, people are very much aware that Jews are part of a family of tribes. So really, how many tribes are there today?
One, isn't there?
Well, we're all called Jews because we are from the tribe of Judah, right? That one tribe that was left, that absorbed Benjamin. But there is one other tribe that's left. The Levites. And the priestly family of the Levites are called Kohanim, priests. All the Kohanim are Levites. People think we have Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael, meaning that there are 3 tribes of Jews. No, there's the tribe of Judah, and there's the Levites. The Levites were really spread out among all the tribes. And those that were with Judah, and the majority of them were with Judah, because, why? Because they practiced their function was the temple, and the temple was located in Judea. So there we had it. So really we have 2 tribes. The Levites really are not Jews. They're Levites. But we call them Jews anyway. It's okay.
Wait, and the Kohanim and all the
Kohanim are the priestly family of the Levites, the head family, the descendants of Aaron, who was a Levite.
There were other names that you said with that?
Huh?
There's something else besides Kohanim? Is there?
Kohanim, Levim is the Levites,
Okay.
and Yisrael, Israelites, which really means the Jews.
So do they practice Judaism?
What?
If you're saying they're not Jews,
They're not Jews, they're Levites. They're Israel, they're part of Israel.
Okay.
But we're called Jews because we're from the tribe of Judah.
Okay.
But they're not from our tribe.
Okay.
They're from the tribe of Levite. However, today, most of them are really more than half Jews because they're married. They're married. The Levites married. The lineage is from the male, but almost all the women came from Jews. It's very strange to say that they're not really Jews. I mean, I didn't mean it in the sense that we think of Jews. I just mean from the tribe of Judah, that's all. Just meant it to wake you up a little bit.
These lost 10 tribes, are they considered to be just...
Gone, that's right. Right. So we find remnants of it. So we think the Philoshes are from the tribe of Dan. The Ethiopian Jews are from the tribe of Dan. So we recognize that they're Jews, so we accepted them in Israel. So they're there. And it was a remarkable thing to see what other people in the history of the world ever took blacks out of Africa to freedom.
But inasmuch as we consider the Ethiopian Jews, the Levites would be Jews, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Right. So the Ethiopian Jews are really not Jews. They're Danites.
Okay.
In the tribal language. Right. Very good. Okay.
What is the prayer in Christianity that you said they take out of home?
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Not the prayer.
Or the
There's a verse.
Right.
The verse, and the young woman will show you and the Lord will show you a sign. The young woman will conceive, and call his name Emmanuel. Now, the word in Hebrew for young woman is Alma. Alma, the Christians translate as virgin. Proof of the virgin birth. It's a prophecy from Isaiah that there's going to be a virgin birth, and it's going to be Jesus, and we'll name him called Emmanuel, which means God is with us. Okay, but the whole verse is taken out of context in terms of the Christians, the way they use it, and also Alma does not mean virgin. The Hebrew word for virgin is betulah. And even that in the Bible itself doesn't mean virgin. There is no such word at all in the Bible for virgin. It was a foreign concept as a word in Judaism. How do I know this? Because when it says the word betulah, which means virgin in modern usage, it qualifies it all the time. And it says betulah v'lo yada ish. She's a betulah, but she didn't know a man. And she didn't know a man. Why did you have to say she didn't know a man if it already meant virgin? See? And there's another place comparing, or Jeremiah compares the destruction of the first temple, which I'm going to get to in a minute, to the city of Jerusalem as a betulah, as that lost her husband. You know, that the city lost the temple. It's like she lost her husband, right? So, but how can a betulah mean a virgin if it has a husband? You see? So there's no concept of the word. And Alma, wherever else it's used, means just a young woman. That's what it means. And it's not a common word, but it is a word that has roots and usage throughout the Bible. Misused. This is a typical example. It's one of the main verses of the Christians in the theology, and it's obvious distortion.
So it was not a virgin birth, is what you're saying.
I'm not saying anything about Mary and what happened with her. I'm saying the uses of this verse to prove that is ridiculous. That's all I'm saying. And if it's Isaiah 6, I believe. I'm not quite sure. If you want, I can look it up for you. All right. King Solomon's son continues with the temple, and there's this whole series of kings, and many of the kings are wicked and abuse their power, and some are wonderful. You have a young king, Menashe, Josiah rather, who as a young man, people forgot the Torah, and then it was discovered again. Priest discovered it. He ordered it read. It was put aside because his parents brought in idol worship, and they tried to destroy all references to the Torah. And one priest just hid the Torah somewhere. Like one priest hid a cruse of oil for Hanukkah in the story, hid the Torah. And then all of a sudden, when the son was born, when the son became king because the parents were died, he brought out the Torah and said, "Oh, look what I found! What is it?" Right? And then he read it before everybody, and the people began, and he read it before the king and the king's officers, and the king ordered. He was a little kid. He ordered it read before everybody, and everybody started to cry because it shows how they abandoned God and the covenant, and it restored the whole covenant. You could see how fragile Judaism was. I mean, Judaism could have been destroyed completely, but for that, by one Torah. For one computer disk, could change the world with the formula for the cure for cancer, right?
Well, was there just one Torah? I mean, in this.
So some scholars want to say, what is it that he found? Was it really the Torah? It says Torah. Some people say it was the book of Deuteronomy, which is a sort of where Moses repeats all the main laws of the Torah in the book of Deuteronomy. So this is a debate what exactly it was. But the simple understanding is that it was the Torah. You can see how it could be lost. They didn't have synagogues all over at that time. There was no such thing. People had worship, came to the temple, and that's where they kept all this. God kept sending prophets to the Jewish people, warning them. Even the northern temple, the northern kingdom, was warned by prophets like Amos and others, who came to them and said, "Look, you're abandoning God's Torah. You're practicing idolatry, idol worship. If you don't stop, God is going to destroy you, and your kingdom will be destroyed." And they didn't listen, and they were destroyed. And it happened again with the southern kingdom. And finally, the big destruction came. Jeremiah predicted it, and it came. And it was a terrible, terrible thing. In the year 586 BCE, the temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. What a name. I don't know if I can spell it. Now, some of these letters are doubled in some of the pronunciation, some of the B's and C's and Z's and whatever ends. But 586 BC, the Babylonians destroyed the temple. They laid siege to Jerusalem. They didn't just destroy it. With the destruction of Jerusalem, I would say probably more than 500,000 Jews were killed. Things were incredibly bad. No water could be found, or food can go in. Things got so bad in the siege that if you want to read some of the books of Book of Lamentations, the Book of Jeremiah, you will see. They explain things like mothers cooking their dead babies for food. I mean, that you can't imagine a greater desperation than that. And the whole stories that emerge from the Midrash are just heart-wrenching, heart-wrenching. Just tears your guts out. Things they went through. How the priests defended the temple. It's just amazing. And the people were taken out of... Nebuchadnezzar had a great philosophy. He felt that a people could not, or would not, defend someone else's land. But if you try to occupy a nation on their own land, they'll eat you alive. So what he did was, wherever he conquered a land, he took the people off and he moved them somewhere else. He moved another people in. Right? So he wouldn't fight
Like
so hard
busing.
because it's not your land. See? So he took the Jews out. If we would have done that in Vietnam, I mean, we would have had less problems. These Vietnamese, they would crawl out of the woodwork because it was their land, right? And they'd hit us and sting us, and then they'd hide. There was no way that we were going to we were going to win that war, especially the way we fought it. And so the Jews were taken off or out of Israel and brought to Babylonia in stages, but it was done. Another people were brought in, like called the Shomronim, the Sumerians, to fill the void. That's significant. I'll tell you why now. Because there was a very common belief at that time that every land had its own god or gods. So the Shomronim, when they left the land that they were in, they came to the land of Judea. They adopted the Jewish God because he was the God who dwelt there. They also didn't give up a lot of their idolatrous practices that they brought with them. That became a problem later on, 70 years later, when the Jews returned and rebuilt the temple. They wanted to be accepted as Jews. But the Jews refused to accept them as Jews because they refused to give up many of their idolatrous practices. And so they became bitter enemies of the Jews, telling on the Syrians, the Persians, and making up stories about the Jews, that the Jews were being disloyal or whatever, and interfered with the rebuilding of the temple. But I'm running ahead of myself. The Jews came to Babylon. Here they were, people off their land. What people in the history of the world were taken off their land and survived as a people? It never happened before. It has never happened since, only to the Jewish people. Think about it. What people were taken off their land and survived as a unit, as a people? Never happened.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
But they're still in there, and they might be here. They're still in America.
Yeah, but not maybe to them, because when they were often removed from their land, they were removed from where their ancestors were buried, and to them that was. They could have been sent to the other side of the world.
It was the other side of the world to them. From North Carolina to the west was.
Okay,
But it's okay that that's a small exception.
No, you made it.
You could argue survival as a people on that one too.
Yeah,
Well, they've
So, on
survived.
the other hand,
Barely,
survived,
but they
just
have
barely.
survived.
yeah. Well, let's hope we can keep them survived, because we need them. But as far as in Babylon in 586 BC, it never happened. The people thought God abandoned them. And if they're all in new land, would God follow them into new land? They had all these questions. And the prophets were reassuring them. Yes, God will never leave you. God will follow you into the new land, and you'll repent for your sins, and He'll forgive you, and you'll return. Well, what happened? Just a few, not much longer after that, maybe 50 years or so, Cyrus the Great comes on the scene. He's the king of Persia. The Persians and the Medes, Persian Empire. And he walks into Babylonia and conquers it without firing a shot. Not that they had guns at the time, but he had such massive power of armies with him. And he infiltrated the upper echelons of the Babylonian hierarchy that they just gave up. And he walked right in and took over peacefully. So the Jews didn't have to be involved in that kind of battle. But he had a different philosophy on how to handle different peoples in his empire than Nebuchadnezzar had. Nebuchadnezzar was moving people around. His philosophy, and destroying their houses of worship, like he destroyed the temple, Cyrus's philosophy was to let people go back to their ancestral lands, to rebuild their holy places. And he would be seen as the liberator of these people. Now, he really didn't let them go back and establish autonomy or independence. He just let them go back and rebuild their holy places. And for them, that was a lot. That was a lot. They really appreciated it. As a matter of fact, he's called Koresh, and you can see where David Koresh got this from. He is referred to as Messiah, Mashiach, by the prophets. He is the anointed. He will be the anointed one from God that will come, and will allow the Jews to rebuild the temple, and it will be rebuilt 70 years after the destruction. And you know what? Exactly 70 years after the destruction, in 586, in the year 516 BCE, it was rebuilt and rededicated to the day, almost. Now, this Babylonian experience is a watershed of dates. I started off by telling you what dates are important, what events are important. If you can remember only 2 dates in Jewish history, I'll repeat it again. You remember this date and the date of the destruction of the Second Temple, which is the year 70. Why is this date so important to Jewish history? Because we had a diaspora Judaism. We were not living in our own land. We did not have our temple, central worship. How were we going to live without central worship? Where were we going to say our prayers? What were we going to do? Jewish life had to be recreated. And they did. First, they created these houses of meetings, which in Hebrew is Beit Knesset, and in Greek is called synagoga. Synagogues. Originally, these houses of meetings, where Jews would gather on holidays and Sabbaths, and the Levites and the priests would sing the songs that they would sing in the temple with the sacrifices. Only they didn't have the sacrifices, but they would read the sections of the Torah that talked about the sacrifices. At least, if they can't offer the sacrifices, they shouldn't forget what it was.
Why couldn't they offer the sacrifices? There's no temple.
It wasn't the temple.
Are
And
we
the-
now after the destruction of the second temple?
Huh?
Skipped between.
No, the first
building-
temple. First temple. Destruction at the
So
first
they
temple.
had the synagogues between the first temple and the building of the second.
Right. Right after destruction of the first temples, and they came to Babylon, they established these houses of meetings. Houses of gathering. They just must have gotten together to recite these prayers. And a liturgy began to evolve. I'm not saying it happened overnight, but over the next 70 years, during that 7-year period, things evolved. And they had the creation of synagogues. Also, a body of religious authority developed, called the Anshe Knesset Hagadola, or if you want to just write it simply, the Men of the Great Assembly. Now, why is this significant? This is very significant. Before, if you had a real problem on Jewish law and Jewish understanding, where'd you go? You went to the temple and you asked the priest, what's the law? And if the priest didn't really know it from his studying, he would ask the high priest, who had the Urim V'Tumim, the special breastplate, and when he went before God, he could ask God questions, he would get answers. But he wore this. It was a real mystical thing. There's no opportunity for that now. Now, if you wanted to know what you should do, Jewish life is full of complex things, especially now if you're on someone else's land. There are all kinds of questions that are going to arise. So what do? You need a scholar to figure it out. So the whole idea of a rabbi developed. We never had before. The priests used to be the teachers. And the rabbi was someone who didn't have to be a priest. He just had to be smart enough to figure things out. But it was a very democratic thing. I mean, anybody could have. It was democratic in the sense that anybody could ascend to that position. And the men of the Great Assembly were composed of the greatest minds of their generation. Some people say it was the same as the Sanhedrin, the great court, which is about 71. So we think it was about 71 rabbis. Whatever it was, we're not quite 100% sure about that. But this is the beginning of rabbinic Judaism. Really changed the face of Jewish life.
Where did the word rabbi come from?
It means teacher. Rav means teacher. So these are the ones who had disciples, and they would teach the law.
Don't Moshe means teacher also? Moshe means teacher.
Moshe from Moses?
No, what's that? Morel.
Moreh.
And that means teacher also,
Right. That's right.
So Moreh and Rabbi is the same.
Right? Except Rav was a higher title. Someone who reached a higher level. And that's all.
We have in Morel. We have in Morel.
Oh yeah, all teachers all teachers you go into most schools call them Moreh.
Oh.
Any Hebrew school program called teacher Moreh. Except if the teacher's a rabbi, you call him rabbi. That's all.
Is there a difference between rabbi and rebbe?
Rebbe is a term of endearment that the Hasidim put on their rabbis who they thought had very, very special spiritual qualities, not necessarily scholarly, who had really direct connections with the spirit. And if you wanted to know certain things that you needed to know to live, if certain questions: should you marry this person? Should you go into this business? Or you have sickness, and what should you do? Things like that. You wanted someone who had not just an ability to figure things out from the law, but maybe someone who had a direct connection. And that's what the Hasidim refer to as Rebbe. It's interesting that there are even women in the Hasidic lore that were the Rebbes. But you won't hear the Lubavitch talk about that. It's not too Lubavitch. All right. The Jews began to return. This is also very significant. They began to return. So Cyrus told them they can go back and rebuild the temple. But the truth of the matter is, most of them did not go back. Why? Here's a fundamental law of Jewish migration. When Jews are well off financially, they don't move.
Except for Abraham.
Yeah, you have the rare pioneers, people who are filled with great spirit and zest and zeal. Who are the American Jews going back to Israel today? Think about it. These people are prepared to give up so much. I know people
What was
who...
the name of the mafia leader? Now he went back. That's right.
Who, Lansky, Meyer Lansky?
Yeah,
he
yeah.
he didn't go back because he was looking for spirit. He was looking for asylum. He was looking to hide.
And they wouldn't do
Yeah,
it.
but preceding that was what you said, this horrible time when they had nothing and no food, and maybe it was a mere fact of fear and survival.
Right.
Rather than any sort of...
No doubt, that's part of the mix. That's part of the... Who wants to go to Israel now? You know what's going on there? Maybe you're going to get shot. Maybe a terrorist is going to stick a knife in your back, or you're going to blow up on a bus.
And if the system had evolved, if you just these houses of the meetings, and their needs were being...
Yeah, they were. Not only that, they developed teachers, and they were learning Torah, and the greatest academies began to develop
In Babylonia?
in Babylonia, and which were, well, getting ahead of myself, but they were more authoritative than the academies that developed later on in Israel, and so the the Babylonian Talmud that we have today is more authoritative than what we call the Jerusalem or Palestinian Talmud. That's right. Because they were unencumbered by persecution. That began to inevitably follow by the Greeks and the Romans. But anyway, Jews went back. They did go back. And how did they fund the rebuilding of the temple? How did they fund their pioneering spirit of the new land? They created a JNF of their own, a Jewish National Fund of sorts. You can read, if you want fascinating reading, it's not long. You read the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, the last of the prophets. You'll see this whole story laid out, how Jews lived in a multicultural society, and how they formed these great funds to send the Jews, to some pioneers who want to go back, and they raised monies. Were great fundraisers even then. and interesting, the Levites didn't go back. Very few of them went back. Least proportion of all. Kohanim, they all went back because they were going to be the big machers now in the temple, right? The Levites didn't want to go back. Why? You can see there was a shortage of Levites. Because who were the Levites? They were the schleppers. They were the guys who worked in the temple who did all the schlepping for the Kohanim, the priests. Well, if you had a good business, why do you want to go back to be a schlepper? Right? They were well off. So very few of them went back.
Did they run the school?
Huh?
Did they run the schools?
They're the rabbis now.
That's what I meant, they ran the schools.
The Levites? Not anymore. The rabbis were created in Babylonia. So the rabbis ran the schools. And the rabbis went back too. And they created schools in Jerusalem. They had trouble in Jerusalem rebuilding the temple. Of course, the Sumerians who were there were not accepted by the Jews. They made a lot of trouble for them. And they would sabotage the rebuilding of the temple physically, and tell stories about the unfaithfulness and disloyalty of the Jews to the Persian authorities. So they had a hard time, and they complained about it. And the prophets constantly were reassuring them, God is with you, you will fulfill your mission. The prophecy says in 70 years the temple will be rededicated. It worked out just fine. Now you have the new temple. And you have a Jewish community in Jerusalem and its environs. And they're growing in Israel. As people see that in Babylon, that it's not so hard to live in Israel and it's not so dangerous, more of them came and it began to grow. Well, it's not too unfamiliar a story. And they developed great academies. They developed a whole temple ritual that was different from the first temple. Why? Because they had all this ritual that they developed in the synagogue when they created the synagogue service, and they added that to the sacrifices. So prayer was now really a big part, a much bigger part of the temple worship than it was before. Now, here we're coming to the Hanukkah story. In about the year 325, a great conqueror appeared on the scene of the world.
Is this BCE?
Yeah. Alexander the Great. This is really where this book begins, I believe. I don't know if the other history books. Alexander the Macedonian. I don't know too much about Alexander. He wasn't an old guy when he conquered the world. He was in his early 30s or something like that.
Yeah, very young.
Right? And he just ripped right through the world quickly. He was welcomed with open arms by the Jews. And the Jews, one great rabbi greeted him, even told him that he was going to be victorious, told him how, etc. And he was good to the Jews, and he let them continue worshiping, and he lifted the yoke of oppression. I forget which peoples were oppressing them at the time, but he lifted that yoke off their shoulders. And in gratitude, that year, Jews named all their children Alexander or Alexandra. So now that became a Jewish name. My father's name is Yiddish. In Yiddish, it was Sender. Sender. Sender is short for Alexander. Sender. Alexander. Sender. Same thing. So we see that really has survived as a very Jewish name till this day. The problem occurred with Alexander's death. He had 4 great generals that divided his kingdom. 2 of them are really important for our knowledge. There's Ptolemy and Seleucid. Ptolemy, I always love the spelling of that. Very strange. Ptolemy and Seleucid. Ptolemy became the ruler of Egypt and its environs, and Seleucid became the ruler of Syria and its environs.
That's where Cleopatra came from, is Ptolemy.
Right.
Say that again, I'm sorry. Where was Ptolemy?
Ptolemy was Egypt, and Seleucid was Syria. Ah, good question. Israel, if you look at the map, is right between them. So they fought over it. And that's the problem. Israel is just in that, very important strategic spot. Eventually, the Seleucids wrested control of Israel. Now, what you have to understand is about the psyche of these Greeks. They felt that they had a mission, a divine mission, and they were going to change the world and bring civility to the world. And they felt that their Greek culture was way superior to anything anywhere, in terms of its science and mathematics and astronomy and literature and drama and philosophies. That was so significant to them. And they thought that they were going to, wherever they went, they were going to just bring that with them and force it on this culture, whatever culture it was. And they did it by identifying certain elements in the local culture with their culture. So, for instance, the Phoenician god Baal became Baal Zeus. Right? Baal and Zeus. Baal Zeus. They identified that. So everybody became Greek in that way. And in Alexandria, they had the most incredible, Alexandria is in Egypt, named after Alexander the Great, most incredible library ever. And in that library they sought to have the greatest works of the world, and they got a hold of the rabbis, and they got 70 rabbis together and put them in 70 different cells to translate the Bible into Greek. And they all translate. They put them in 70 different cells to make sure to see if it was going to be accurate. And they all translated it the same. Well, they probably got together beforehand and decided how they would do it. But that's the lengths they went to accumulate the great knowledge of the world. They tried to do this on the Jews, but the Jews had a hard time with it. At least some Jews did. But a lot of Jews became very much enamored with Greek culture. And what do we call them? Hellenists. Especially the upper echelons of society. The rich, the hoi polloi, many of the priests who felt being pushed out by their authority because of the rabbis. a lot of these upper echelons, they adopted Greek philosophy, Greek culture. They were embarrassed by their circumcisions. How many of you read the book The Source? Right? Remember that chapter where the guy tries to go, where he goes down to Egypt because he likes to play in the games, wants to play in the gymnasia, the games, but he's embarrassed because he's got a circumcision.
Yeah.
And you play nude, so he went back to Egypt to have an operation, special operation, to have something sewn on to look like he's got a foreskin. That's the lanes that people went to fit in to the big society. It's very much a message for our times today.
I was thinking of $100 Nikes myself. 10-year-olds.
Yeah, but mommy, I could jump higher and I'll be on a basketball team. Anyway, it was tough. It was very tough because it wasn't the good guys against the bad guys so much. It's very easy to tell a story when the bad guys come in and force you to do this, and then the good guys are triumphant. But the big battle was was not so much with the Syrians as it was between the Jews. You know, so you can read the story of the Maccabees if you want. You can get it. The book of Maccabees is not included in the Jewish Bible. It's only in the Christian Bible. Why isn't it in the Jewish Bible? Because the Bible was canonized about the year 200 BC. And the story of Hanukkah took place about the year 165. It's too late. The rabbis already voted on what's going to be in there, in the Bible. That whole process of voting, it was a fascinating story in itself.
165 was the battlefield?
Was what?
You said 165?
65 was the Hanukkah story.
165 was
165 BCE. Apocryphal literature is a literature of the Jews that's really post-biblical. Anyway, as the book of Maccabees will tell you, there was Mattathias, who was an old man. It was a priest or high priest, and he was forced in his town in Modin to worship a pig, and he refused to do it, and he killed a Jew. Another Jew who was doing it, and he killed the guard, and then he said, he repeated the words of Moses, "All for God, come with me," and he began a guerrilla war, and he attracted a lot of people to it, especially after they had some successes. The real reason the Maccabees won is because the Syrians were distracted by wars elsewhere, and they didn't want to bother with this troublesome little group of Jews. And if you read my bulletin article this month, you'd see that they won the battle, but they really lost the war. They were conquered again, and then they came back again, they conquered again, and came back. Maccabees started a new line of kingship, Jewish kingship, which had to be from the seed of David, and the Maccabees were not. They were priests from the tribe of Levi. And
Is it Maccabees?
yeah, the Maccabees were priests. Mattathias was a priest. They were Kohanim. They were priest kings, so to speak. And eventually the disputes between the Jews became such, internal strife, that they invited the Romans in to help settle things. But one thing that's very, very obvious here, when you read this history, and I don't know if anybody ever pointed this out to you, after the destruction of the first temple, which basically happened because of the idolatrous practices of the Jews, that they wouldn't stop, since they came into the land of Canaan after the time Moses, about the year 1200 or so, 1200 to 586. After that, there was no worship of idolatry among the Jewish people ever.
After 586?
right, after the destruction of the temple. You never see that ever. Any reference to it whatsoever. They finally learned the lesson. Never happened again. They fought amongst themselves, this and that, but they never had idolatry. And I think that's very interesting to look at. Now, the Romans were a whole new story. And the Romans didn't want anybody to be independent and didn't tolerate independence. And the Jews were just a feisty little group, and they wanted their independence and to do things their own way. And so the Romans constantly made trouble for the Jews because they felt the Jews were making trouble for them. In comes Jesus, time of Jesus, up to year 2000. Next time we meet, I'm probably going to spend 2 sessions or 3 on the Judaic origins of Christianity, which is, I feel, a fascinating subject. And we live in a Christian world, but we really don't understand what is the nature of Christianity and how did it develop from Judaism. Again, I want to caution you, I will be doing it from my perspective, a Jewish perspective. And so I don't mean to cast aspersions on developing Christianity. I believe it developed for a very important reason, and God wanted it to develop, even though I believe it has some very fundamental flaws that are inherent within it. And I will try to point some of those out to you as well next time. Okay? Any questions? Yeah.
One question. If the whole Maccabean story being included in the New Testament was obviously placed there because they felt it was important, how come it's not more of the Christian tradition to celebrate that?
That's a good question.
Part of that, I think, is that only some Christian Bibles will have the Maccabees in it. Your mainstream Protestant ones won't. Catholic ones that have the books in a little different order from the mainstream Protestant ones all have it. Some of the Protestant ones will have it, and they're stuck in between the New and the Old Testament. I got one like that. So it's, well, Leslie was amazed when I first explained to her that there were 30 different kinds of Baptists, much less when you start getting into Presbyterians and every other thing. But it's not in all of them.
Yeah, it's even worse than the Jews.
You don't want to know.
Consider that there's only 2 major and recognized Christian holidays. It's the birth and the death of Jesus.
Yeah.
Jesus is the whole of it. So those are the only 2 times when the Christian sector celebrates anything. There are even those Christian religions that go so far as they won't celebrate birthdays or any other type of celebration. Only those 2.
Okay.